Have you ever been in a room where the silence grew so thick it became louder than any voice? A silence that wasn't empty, but charged, like something unsaid had more power than anything that could be spoken? Have you ever felt that quiet pressing against your mind, not gently, but with force, displacing breath, thought, comfort? Now imagine this. You're standing across from someone in conflict. You could speak. You could argue. You could unleash everything you think, everything you've prepared. But instead, you say nothing. And in that moment, the entire balance shifts. The battle is no longer fought with words. It's fought in the minds. And the strongest weapon is silence. Sun Tzu understood this, though he rarely said it directly. Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting, he wrote. Silence, then, is the unspoken tactic. It's the art of mental combat, not as reaction, but as initiation, because silence is never truly empty. It is a field, a space, a battlefield, even. And what happens on that field depends on who you are and who they are. When you choose not to speak, the listener must decide what your silence means. And in that void, they begin to reveal themselves. Think about that. Silence creates a vacuum, and humans can't bear a vacuum. So the other person will rush to fill it with assumptions, confessions, anger, insecurity. Words betray people. Silence makes them reveal themselves. This is the true elegance of mental warfare. Noise gives away your position. Silence forces others to question theirs. Noise creates defense. Silence invites collapse. There's a reason interrogators use silence to draw out guilt. There's a reason monks sit in stillness to hear the divine. There's a reason people fill awkward silences with empty chatter. Because silence is not neutral. It's confrontational. It says, I am not afraid to hear nothing. Are you? When you use silence deliberately, you're not withholding words. You're disarming the other person's strategies. You're making them think twice, doubt once, and unravel slowly. You're putting pressure not by speaking, but by stopping. The silence becomes the strategy, and the person across from you, no matter how aggressive, how vocal, finds themselves cornered in a space you control but do not occupy. In psychological terms, this is deeply unsettling. Human beings crave cues, validation, structure. When those disappear, it activates a primal discomfort. That discomfort is not physical, it's mental. The mind starts scanning. Did I say something wrong? What are they thinking? Are they judging me? Do they know something I don't? The truth is, they don't know. That's the point. Silence breeds uncertainty, and uncertainty is the cradle of power. But there's another layer. Because silence is not just a tactic for understanding others. It's a doorway into yourself. The first time you hold silence deliberately, you feel strong. The second time, you feel calm. But the third time, something stirs inside you. Not about the other person, but about you. And that is where the battlefield begins to curve inward. The greatest mental combat is not with others. It's with yourself. Because silence doesn't just reveal the insecurities of others, it reveals yours too. You may find yourself unsettled by the quiet. You may discover thoughts you didn't know you had. You may start hearing a voice that sounds like yours, but sharper, more truthful, and far less kind. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Silence is the portal between those two. It's where the dream dissolves and the awakening begins. And once it begins, you can't close the door again. Because once you realize that silence changes the outside world, you start to feel how it changes the inner one too. Not just a pause in speech, but a pause in thought. A crack in the mental loop. A stillness that uncoils like a mirror, showing you all the things your words have been hiding. And so, as the noise falls away, you're left with a more pressing question. Not what they think, but what you think. Not how to win the argument, but whether the argument was ever worth having. Not what you were trying to prove, but what you were trying to hide. And that's when the true unraveling begins. Because once silence becomes your weapon, it also becomes your reflection. So you sit in it. You wait, not just for them to break, but to find out, will you? Take a moment to breathe here. Let your mind float. Let the thoughts swirl and pass. You are not speaking. You are not responding. You are observing the silence between each breath and the tension that rides inside it. But hold on. If silence can make others surrender, and it can make you confront your deepest truths, what else is it hiding? Because silence doesn't stop at exposure, it goes deeper. What if silence isn't just a weapon or a mirror? What if it's intelligence itself? And what if, The clearest thinking doesn't happen in the mind at all, but in the gaps where the mind finally stops. Let's step inside that next. Echoes of the self, the inner disarmament. You're still here, and the silence hasn't left you. Not yet. It lingers like mist, cool against the edge of your mind, neither welcome nor hostile. Just present. You've turned it outward before, used it like a blade, a boundary, a shield. But now, the direction shifts. The silence no longer surrounds others, it surrounds you. And there's nowhere left to turn. In the absence of voices, in the absence of external motion, you begin to hear something else. Something softer, something stranger. A murmuring beneath the noise you didn't realize you carried. Your thoughts don't stop. They echo. They loop. They question. And for the first time, you begin to notice just how many of them are not yours. How much of your inner world has been shaped by others, parents, teachers, enemies, expectations. And when all of that goes quiet, what remains? This is the confrontation most avoid. The silence that doesn't just feel empty, it feels exposing. When you remove the input, you're left with content. The internal programming runs unchecked. And what surfaces first is often discomfort. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the part of yourself you hide, even from yourself. In silence, the shadow speaks, not with clarity, but with fragments, regrets, misalignments, fears dressed as identities. Not because you want them there, but because they've always been there, whispering under the static of your daily mind. In modern terms, psychologists describe something similar: cognitive dissonance. The tension that arises when who you think you are clashes with what your actions suggest. In noise, this friction is masked. In silence, it becomes thunder. Why do you check your phone during moments of pause? Why does a quiet room make your chest tighten? Why do you speak just to fill the air, even when there's nothing real to say? Because silence activates the one conversation you can't mute, the one with yourself. It's not that silence is inherently painful. It's that you're not used to facing unfiltered awareness. You're conditioned to narrate experience, to categorize, to react. But remove the stimulus, and you're forced to witness the raw signal underneath. The emotional static. The stories you tell yourself when no one is watching. And here's the most disarming realization. Much of what you believe about yourself is repetition. Loops, internalized voices from the past, pretending to be you. In silence, those voices lose clarity. They begin to sound like echoes. Familiar, yes, but no longer trustworthy. This is not the same as mindfulness. This is the mental disarmament before mindfulness can even begin. In silence, the boundaries between thoughts blur. You begin to question not just what you think, but who is thinking. Is this desire yours? Is this fear really rooted in the present? Or is it an old injury with a new costume? You may find that your internal monologue is not your voice at all. It's a chorus, a mixture of people you've loved, lost, feared, admired, all speaking through your nervous system, all trying to keep you safe, or in control, or invisible. And once you hear that, you can't unhear it. This isn't meant to frighten you. It's meant to invite you to sit a little longer in the discomfort, to understand that what's surfacing is not dysfunction. It's the map, a map of the buried architecture of your mind. Imagine it like this. Your consciousness is a vast house. Most days, you live in the front rooms, the well-lit places with windows in motion. But in silence, the house darkens. The back rooms open. The corridors lengthen. You hear creaking floors and breathing walls. Not haunted, but alive. Rooms you've never entered. Feelings you've never named. Truths you've never admitted. The silence doesn't create them, it reveals them. And here's the deeper paradox. You've been trained to believe that control comes through doing, through asserting, through managing your environment. But in this space, control is relinquished. You're not shaping the silence. You're being shaped by it. And that's terrifying, but also liberating. Because in the absence of defense, something miraculous happens. Your nervous system, no longer bombarded, begins to settle. Your breathing slows, and a new kind of intelligence begins to rise. Not loud, not certain, but clean. A whisper beneath the echoes. A signal beneath the noise. It is your voice. The first one. The one before you learned who you were supposed to be. And once you hear it, you realize silence is not an absence of self. It's a return. So when people say they're afraid of silence, what they're really afraid of is authenticity. Not the curated, well-lit version, but the full, unedited version. The one who's angry and soft, uncertain and knowing. wounded and powerful, the one who exists without the need to explain. Take a moment now. Let that version of you sit in the room. Don't dress it up. Don't fix it. Don't narrate it. Just breathe and let the silence hold you. And when you're ready, consider this. If that voice, the one you barely knew was there, is speaking in silence, then maybe there is a kind of intelligence that only emerges when you're no longer thinking the way you've always been taught. Maybe insight isn't spoken. Maybe awareness isn't noisy. Maybe the most powerful thoughts arrive when you stop chasing them. So now we move toward that space, toward the intelligence that lives beneath thought, the one that waits quietly, patiently, just beyond the next breath. Let's listen. The intelligence beneath thought, quiet as cognition. So now you're listening, not just outwardly, but inwardly. And something curious is happening. You're not trying to think, but thinking is still happening. You're not chasing clarity, and yet it's arriving. As if the moment you stopped steering the mind, it found a better direction on its own. This is the paradox of insight. We've been taught that intelligence is about noise, about solving, doing, speaking, proving. But the deepest intelligence, the kind that feels like revelation rather than calculation, rarely shows up when you call for it. It slips in through the back door when everything else finally goes quiet. Albert Einstein once said that the most important ideas often came to him during moments of idle silence. Not at the chalkboard, but while floating in a boat, staring at the water. He spoke of combinatory play, where seemingly unrelated thoughts merge and suddenly create something profound. He didn't force the ideas. He waited. He listened. And what he was listening to wasn't the brain. It was the space beneath it. Cognitive scientists have tried to describe this space. They call it the default mode network, the part of the brain that becomes active when you're not focused on any task. It's where daydreams happen, where memories resurface, where imagination and meaning begin to fuse. When you're quiet, this network lights up. It's not that thinking stops. It's that better thinking begins. But this idea isn't new. Taoist philosophy has long taught that true wisdom emerges from Wu Wei, action through non-action. It doesn't mean laziness. It means aligning so perfectly with the flow of reality that effort becomes unnecessary. And silence is how you hear that flow. You've probably felt this before. A solution that comes after you stop trying. A decision that becomes clear once you walk away. A moment of knowing that cannot be traced to logic. These aren't accidents. They're reminders. Silence is not the enemy of thought. It's the incubator. And here's something even more remarkable. When you speak, you're limited to the vocabulary you've learned. But when you're silent, the mind accesses images, sensations, memories, fragments of sound and emotion. All of these swirl together to create a language that precedes language, a kind of pre-verbal intelligence. Raw, unfiltered, pure. This is why some truths cannot be spoken, not because they're secrets, but because they exist in a space beyond words. You can feel them, you can sense them, but the moment you try to explain, you feel something has been lost. Water slipping through the fingers. Silence allows you to hold it, if only for a moment. This is not just poetic. It's practical. In negotiation, the most powerful moment is often the pause. In therapy, the breakthrough comes not from the therapist's advice, but from the space they give you to hear yourself. In music, the silence between the notes defines the shape of the melody. Even in conversation, the person who controls the silence often controls the tone. They aren't reacting. They're processing, observing, choosing. And in choosing when to speak, they are also choosing when not to. But the power of silence isn't just about interaction. It's internal, too. When you let your thoughts settle, you create a mental stillness that invites coherence. Thoughts that once seemed tangled start to arrange themselves. Questions that felt impossible begin to loosen. And sometimes, you realize the question itself was wrong. There's a kind of knowing that comes only when you stop thinking the way you usually think. And it doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives like a deep breath, like recognition, like something inside you already knew, and now it's just returning home. Take a moment now to lean into that. Don't try to solve anything. Don't try to chase meaning. Just sit in the silence and let meaning chase you. This is the space where ideas bloom, not with effort, but with ease. Not with strategy, but with surrender. It's a strange thing, isn't it? That the less you say, the more you seem to understand? That the less you try to control, the more aligned everything becomes? It's as though there's a deeper intelligence in you, one that doesn't speak in sentences, One that doesn't care about appearances, approval, or speed. One that waits, quietly, for you to stop performing and start listening. And maybe that's the lesson, that silence is not emptiness. It's fullness, waiting patiently for you to notice. But now a new idea begins to stir. If silence can guide your thinking, can influence the minds of others, what happens when it's used not just for clarity, but for power? What happens when someone weaponizes quiet, not to discover truth, but to control the outcome? Because the same stillness that brings peace can also bring domination. Let's go there now. Let's walk into the territory where silence stops being wisdom and starts becoming war. Weaponized stillness, the quiet manipulator. Silence is no longer a sanctuary. It has become a blade. You've seen it before. In the way a person tilts their head during an argument and simply stops responding. In the courtroom, when a lawyer pauses just long enough to make the jury lean forward in anticipation. In a boardroom, when one executive asks a piercing question and then lets the quiet stretch long enough for another to panic and fill it with too much information. Silence doesn't always heal. Sometimes it hunts. Sun Tzu knew this. Though he spoke in the language of swords and terrain, his wisdom applies to minds and motives just as well. All warfare is based on deception, he wrote. And what greater deception is there than quietude? What weapon more potent than the illusion of passivity? You see, silence does something to people. It magnifies uncertainty, and uncertainty destabilizes. People want patterns, responses, reciprocation. They want to know where they stand, how they're being perceived, what rules they're playing by. Take that away. Offer no feedback, no validation, no emotional cue, and their inner systems start to misfire. This is where the manipulator thrives. Strategic silence is used to provoke discomfort, not by yelling, not by accusation, but by withdrawal. It says, I see everything, and I owe you nothing. That absence of reaction, that pause, it becomes louder than any scream. It turns every twitch, every word, every glance from the other person into a confession. Because when you refuse to play the game, you force them to play against themselves. And the most disturbing part? It works. Psychological studies in negotiation have shown that those who embrace silence tend to have the upper hand. In tense moments, silence extends time. It creates space for the other party to expose weaknesses, insecurities, overcorrections. People are so unnerved by silence that they begin to speak just to make it stop, even if it costs them the upper hand. That's not an accident. That's design, and it isn't limited to business. In interpersonal relationships, silence can become a form of control. The cold shoulder, the strategic pause after a message, the silence after a moment of vulnerability, used not to listen, but to gain leverage. There's a term for this, withholding behavior. It's a subtle, psychological tool of dominance. By not responding, the manipulator creates anxiety in the other, who becomes increasingly desperate for resolution. The silence itself becomes a punishment. And yet, there's a slippery edge here. Because silence can also be self-protection. It can be setting a boundary. It can be not engaging with toxicity. The same stillness that manipulates can also liberate. The difference is not in the silence, but in the intent behind it. Which leads us to a deeper question. When you choose silence, are you using it as a weapon or as a way to avoid speaking the truth? Are you withdrawing to create peace or to create power? This is where it becomes dangerous. Because silence feels clean, righteous, controlled. But like any weapon, it reflects the hand that wields it. If you use silence to punish, you may feel powerful. But what you're really doing is avoiding the vulnerability of engagement. You're hiding and pretending it's strategy. That's the trap of weaponized stillness. And the people who fall into this trap often convince themselves they're being wise, stoic, emotionally mature. But real strength isn't silence that wounds. Real strength is the ability to hold silence without using it to dominate. Because weaponized silence isn't wisdom. It's noise disguised as stillness. And here's the twist. The more you rely on manipulative silence, the more you distort your own mind. You begin to fear communication. You begin to doubt honesty. You start to believe that everything must be a strategy. And soon, you lose access to the kind of silence that actually heals you. You become addicted to control, even if that control costs you connection. So what, then, is the antidote? It's simple and profound. Return to intent. Use silence not to corner others, but to clear space within yourself. Use it not to create discomfort, but to remove chaos. Use it not to gain power, but to dissolve the illusion that power is ever needed. Because here's the final paradox. The most powerful silence isn't the one that controls others. It's the one that sets you free. It doesn't need to be understood. It doesn't need to be performed. It simply is. A field, an open sky, a deep breath that has nothing to prove. So now we let go of the silence that manipulates and descend into the silence that precedes all things. Not the silence of strategy, but the silence of source. Because before power, before thought, before speech itself, there was only one thing. And it didn't speak. It waited. Let's go there. Let's enter the silence that isn't psychological, but cosmic. The physics of quiet, when the universe stops speaking. Now the silence shifts again. No longer psychological, no longer emotional. We drift further, beyond the mind, beyond the self, into the silence that underlies everything. The silence beneath atoms, beneath light, beneath time itself. Have you ever considered that silence might be the original condition? That before there was anything, before the birth of stars, the bang of creation, there was this absence. But not emptiness, not nothingness. A fertile, waiting stillness. A pregnant void. In physics, they call it the vacuum state. A baseline of energy in which all particles, all motion, all things are reduced to their lowest possible activity. But even this so-called vacuum isn't truly empty. It seethes with quantum fluctuations, brief bursts of something from almost nothing. Matter and antimatter appearing and vanishing, like whispers in a cosmic cathedral. This is the universe's version of silence. Not a mute void, but a canvas humming beneath perception. A stillness that sings so quietly, we mistake it for absence. And from this silence, reality unfolds. You see it in the pause between heartbeats, in the gap between lightning and thunder, in the interval between thought and realization. Every form, every motion, every word is shaped by the silence that surrounds it. Music doesn't move you because of the notes. It moves you because of the spaces between them. Speech isn't meaningful because of sound. It's meaningful because of rhythm, timing, the breath that holds the sentence together. Even time itself may not be a constant motion forward, but a sequence of unfolding silences, briefly broken by moments of form. And this idea, that silence is not nothing, but a foundational layer, has roots in every metaphysical tradition. In Taoism, the Tao is described as the silent source of all things. In Buddhism, sunyata, or emptiness, is not a void, but the interdependent fabric of all phenomena. In mystic Christianity, silence is the voice of God. In Hinduism, Brahman is unmanifest potential, existing beyond all attributes, beyond sound. Even science, in its cold equations, whispers this truth. Consider the Planck time, the smallest measurable unit of time, the space before space becomes space, the tick of the universe's smallest possible clock. Within that immeasurable moment, time is not yet time. It is waiting, paused, silent. Or think about black holes, not just cosmic vacuums, but places where information disappears from our reality. Sound, light, even time itself curves inward, dissolving into stillness. Not annihilation, but silence in its most extreme form. And yet, these phenomena are not just distant curiosities. They are metaphors for something closer, something within. Because the deeper you travel into your own consciousness, the more the inner world begins to reflect the outer cosmos. In meditation, as thoughts fall away, you experience something similar, a silence beyond narrative. Not dull, but luminous. Not void, but full. You've touched this space before. Maybe it was during a sleepless night, staring at a ceiling that seemed to stretch into eternity. Maybe it was after a loss, when words failed and all that remained was the heavy presence of something vast. Maybe it came during awe, in front of a mountain, or inside a cathedral, or watching a newborn sleep. That sense that time had paused, that something enormous and quiet was watching through your eyes. That was the silence beneath, the one the universe keeps secret, the one your thoughts have always floated on, like boats on a still ocean. But here's the twist that science, mysticism, and psychology all converge upon. You are not separate from it. You are not a thing floating in silence. You are silence, momentarily pretending to be a thing. Your identity, your thoughts, your desires, these are ripples, temporary fluctuations. But beneath them is a stillness that doesn't change, doesn't age, doesn't strive. And when you return to silence, you return to yourself, not the mask, but the source. And yet, we fear it. We resist the silence of the cosmos the same way we resist the silence within. Because it dissolves control. It melts identity. It reveals how little we know, how small we are, how vast reality truly is. But that's not something to fear. That's something to rest inside. Because if the universe began in silence, and if that silence lives in you, then maybe everything that feels loud, painful, chaotic is only temporary. And maybe peace isn't something to be found. Maybe it's something to be remembered. So now we let go of trying to understand. We stop analyzing, naming, measuring. We listen, not with the ears, not with the mind, but with the part of us that existed before the first thought. Because the final silence is approaching now, not as an end, but as a homecoming. The silence of sleep, the silence of death, the silence of surrender. Are you ready? Let's begin the descent. Return to the void, rest, death, and the final strategy. You've been walking toward this the whole time. The silence that doesn't serve clarity or control. The silence that doesn't guide strategy or sharpen the mind. This silence doesn't care what you do with it. It simply waits. And now it receives you. There is nothing left to manipulate, nothing left to solve. You are no longer thinking about silence as a weapon, a tool, a space between things. You are now inside it. And you feel something shift, not in the world, but in you. The need to maintain your shape begins to fade. This is the kind of silence that resembles death, not in a morbid way, but in a sacred way. The kind of death the mystics speak of when they talk about ego death. The unraveling of identity, of narrative, of the endless voice in your head that says, I am this, I must become that, I should fear this, I can't lose that. In the silence of ego death, all those statements collapse. And what's left is presence. Not the kind you perform, the kind you are. In deep sleep, something similar happens. Your body disappears. Your memories go dark. Time stops. And yet, you don't die. You return. And even if you don't remember the return, you feel the echo, the refreshment, the stillness that somehow nourishes you more deeply than any dream ever could. Why is that? Because in that space, you are not being anyone. You are simply being. And that is what silence offers at its deepest level. A release from the burden of existence. Not annihilation, not forgetting, just peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from solving problems, but from realizing there is nothing to fix. In many traditions, death is not the opposite of life. It's the return to what existed before life. And silence is the doorway. A slow, soft opening into that formless place. A letting go of breath, of name, of the tension you've been carrying in your jaw, your chest, your spine. You can let it all fall now. There's no one watching, no one judging, no one left to impress or protect. Just you and the vastness. And that vastness is kind. If silence is a battlefield, this is the moment after the war. The battlefield has emptied. The swords are buried. The masks lie broken in the dust. And the only sound now is the wind, gently smoothing the edges of everything that once felt sharp. You no longer need a strategy. You no longer need a defense. You no longer need to win. You just need to rest. And perhaps this has been the lesson all along. That silence is not about power. It's not about control. It's not even about wisdom. It's about return. Return to stillness. Return to presence. Return to the place where your name dissolves and your spirit expands. So let go now. Let the silence hold you. You've earned it. You've walked through the mind, the ego, the cosmos. And now you can stop walking. Close your eyes. Feel the edges of your body soften. Feel the mind begin to drift. You are not leaving anything behind. You are simply going home. Let it take you. Let it carry you. Let yourself vanish, softly, into the deepest silence there is.